Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and this is Cisco Cloud Fundamentals series. And in this episode, we're going to take an introductory look into Cisco CloudCenter. That's a lot of C's in that little title. So here is Mr. Ronnie Wong to help us. How are you?
I am doing fine, Vaughn. Thank you again for joining us as we continue through our journey here, taking a look, of course, at the idea and the basics of cloud, components and understanding the cloud technologies behind what Cisco's offering is going to be. And we've already talked a lot about some of the different fundamental terms and concepts behind cloud technology. And this is really one of the first times where we jump into the Cisco-specific types of information that we need to also make sure that we understand. Now, the strange thing about this particular episode, Vaughn, is that even though we've titled it the idea of the Cloud Center and introduction to Cloud Center, it's kind of strange because it's not actually on the exam objectives itself. So let me show you what I'm talking about here, Vaughn. Okay. So on my screen, I have the official exam objectives, and you can go straight to Cisco and download these things as well. I simply used my favorite search engine, Vaughn. I typed in exam 210-451. That brought me to the site, and then there's a link that tells you here's where you can find out the exam topics. And then they even give you another PDF link, and that's what I did is I downloaded this. Now, if you watch the overview for the show, you'll see that we've gone over all these details, and we'll talk about it again here. But I want to make sure that I re-emphasize this particular point as well. Okay, over the past several years, because cloud technologies have changed over time, and this exam actually came out before those changes, you see that there's something a little bit unusual about this. The very fact that they call this new. Okay, all of a sudden lets you know what do you mean by new? Because the original idea was understanding cloud fundamentals. Well, now there's a new one, and the reason why is because some of the technology that they mentioned, especially what we're talking about today, the actual original technology itself has kind of went and become deprecated at a point. So the topic that we're actually on, okay, is right here, and you notice where it actually says Cisco Cloud. Let me zoom that up here, okay. Notice what it says is Cisco Inter-Cloud Solution, okay. And so we're going to be talking about these particular topics here. We're going to spend the first part here on the benefits and giving you an introduction to this, but it's deprecated, Vaughn, so that makes it a little bit more challenging, doesn't it?
It does. So can I ask a question?
Sure.
This Cisco Inter-Cloud Solution, was that their product or service that they used to have, and
Right.
now Cisco CloudCenter is the new name of it?
No, it's not a new name, but let me show you what's happened here, Vaughn, okay? So at some point in the past, here's exactly what's happened, and what we're paying attention to is that yellow bar up top, okay? No longer being developed or supported.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So no longer being developed or supported here, and they're essentially telling you that this product has now been retired. So this is where people that were studying for the exam and trying to look up all this stuff, and just the same way that I did in preparing for this exam, is now I'm like, wait a minute, they're going to test me on a product that they don't support anymore? Are they for real? Now, sometimes it does happen. So, Vaughn, you and I, we've taken many different vendor types of exams before, and there have been times when I've actually taken one and they still actually ask questions about the older solution, even though it hadn't been around in a few years. So it is possible. But just when I thought, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to figure out how to dig this thing up when I can't find any of it anywhere. Well, the great thing is Cisco has a great learning network. And now all of a sudden you can see where somebody's already asked this question a little bit of time ago. Hey, now that they've killed off their particular offering, which is the Inter-Cloud solution here, right? On March 31st, 2017, well, what happens to this path? So normally this is where the community kind of interacts and tries to give you a best guess, okay? Like, what the heck is going to happen now that we have to actually try and figure this out? So what I mean by that is sometimes they're just guesses, okay? In other words, they're best guesses, but they're not ever exactly from the official people.
I was just going to say, it's like as a collective, we're saying that this is probably happening, but the official word comes from Cisco.
Right.
And is it saying that Cisco has an official word on this?
Right. So
Okay.
this is the neat thing, is that rarely do you see this where all of a sudden somebody that's actually a part of the exam chimes in, and here it is. Okay. So this is where I was able to redirect our efforts here. So this person that actually chimed in into the Cisco forum community here, this is the exam manager. Okay. So they're the exam manager. So I know something. That means I'm in charge of this particular exam and the development of it, and of course, everything that's coming along with that. And now they're saying, hey, I can tell you that Cisco will be addressing the product changes for the intercloud fabric here. Okay. So what will happen is that it says that exams and the training materials, okay, will be updated to actually now include, there it is, Cisco CloudCenter instead of the intercloud itself. So if you're wondering, like, if you've gotten a copy of the exam objectives, you're saying, Ronnie, you're going over Cisco CloudCenter and it's not in there, it's not on the objectives itself. This is where I got the information from, and you can document it right here too. And I've included the links in our show notes so that you can see it for yourself, when you actually have a chance to. Now, in doing that, right? So that now means we have to focus in on that idea, okay, that this is what is going to be. So that's why we are doing, instead of an introduction to the idea, the intercloud fabric, like what the exam calls out, we now have the Cisco Cloud Center that we have to be able to make sure that we understand, okay, a little bit more. So that is what we are going to, okay? So, Vaughn, there's no use in studying the technology when the exam manager itself says they're going to be updated, and essentially that they shouldn't be mentioned on the exam. Now, just when I say something like that, right, it doesn't always mean that that's going to happen immediately, okay? So exam vendors are really kind of historically slower than what the output should be, but we are now, since that was actually put out there in February of 2017, we're now in March of 2019 as of the recording of this show. It should have changed in 2 years, okay? So we should be good at this point as of the watching of this episode.
But the exam objectives list that you just brought up, it still says
Right.
The old thing, the cloud
Right.
fabric.
Yeah, intercloud fabric.
Yes, that.
Yeah. So even though it says it, the exam manager himself or herself, excuse me, this is actually a female here. She's actually said that no, it should be updated, but you see where it hasn't updated anything except for the name. So they changed it from understanding, the cloud solutions to the idea of new. That's all they actually did here when I showed you the objectives just a little bit earlier. So that's what I wanted to make sure as far as that goes.
And this test so far, or at least in these particular domains that we're in right now, it seems more about like the foundations, the fundamentals, the theories, if you want to say, behind these things, not necessarily like what color is this button,
Right.
not actually testing you on the interface itself, but the theory behind why and what we're doing. So maybe that's where this is going as well.
Right. So it's still what it is, of course, is that other product didn't do everything that they wanted it to do. And now they've actually said, look, we've got a better solution in hand, and this is what everything is actually updated to. So I want to spend just a few minutes making sure that you understood that we weren't skipping an exam objective because I just decided to skip it and not do it, okay? But we want to make sure that you understand where the reasoning came in from and why we're looking at the Cloud Center.
Or you're looking at the title of this episode, you're looking at the exam objectives,
Yeah,
like
they
why
don't
are you
match
teaching
up.
us something that it's not even on
Right.
the test or whatever.
Yeah, so hopefully I know some people end up skipping the overview, and I get it, but if you did watch the overview, we did kind of mention it that this is what would end up happening. But overall, though, we just want to make sure we mention that once again because people do skip around.
Yeah, and that's great clarification. So thank you very much for that, Ronnie. I'm sure y'all appreciate that too.
All right. So let's talk about this idea, Vaughn. Okay, so when it comes down to the idea of whether we're talking about the intercloud or what the Cloud Center is, and I'll just talk about Cloud Center from now on, or you'll get confused about what I'm talking about. We got to ask that question: what in the world is the Cisco Cloud Center then? When we start to take a look at this idea, well, cloud technology itself, right? We've already talked about the idea when we talk about cloud computing that it really has a fundamental goal, right? We understand that there's 5 characteristics. There are 3 different types of service models, 4 deployment models, but all of that really obscures or abstracts, whatever you want to call it, right? Hides is what the truth of it is, the technology that's behind the idea of cloud solutions doing what we need it to do, okay? The first component in terms of the Cisco solution of dealing with that is that they're saying, look, we have a product here that will help you to manage it through a portal, is what it will do. So if you choose to implement Cisco's technology for a hybrid type of cloud solution, and that's really where they wanted to kind of hit their particular niche type of a market here, okay, is the idea of that hybrid solution. They're saying that the idea of the Cisco Cloud Center is going to be that hybrid management platform, okay? But instead of it being an appliance, right, a device like what Cisco sells is normally hardware that does all this, they actually said, no, this is going to be application-based. So essentially it's software-based instead, and that means it's all about the management of everything that we do. The benefits behind doing this now, okay, is the very fact is that now when we talk about the way that something like this can end up working, it provides the ability to securely provision infrastructure resources. So this means that if you're familiar with any of the other cloud technologies that we've talked about in the past already, whether it's Microsoft Azure or whether it's the AWS, the Amazon Web Services here, the idea of provisioning is simple. If you need to spin up, that's the way I actually think about it, spin up a virtual machine, you can spin up a virtual machine, okay? And you normally use the web interfaces in both of those platforms to do so. Well, in Cisco, they're saying that platform that you use to interact or the interface that you use, it's going to be the Cisco Cloud Center here, okay? So the neat thing about it is that you can, using the Cloud Center here, is that you can actually provision the actual infrastructure resources. Now, this includes virtual switches. It includes the other technology that's actually available out there. And we're going to look at an example of this in our next episode, but I just want to make sure we get through these introductory ideas first, okay? The other thing that we can also do is not only provision things like infrastructure resources, again, virtual machines, switches, routers, et cetera, doing all those other things here, but is to also make sure that we can deploy applications and manage those resources effectively as well. So instead of needing another product to do so, once again, that single interface that helps you do that. Now, when we've recorded this particular episode, right, if you're already familiar with AWS, it's nothing new. You've done all this before through that management portal, and you can actually still do all this. Now, the other advantage, though, and Cisco always calls it an advantage, that's why they call it, discuss or describe the benefits of using this solution, right, is that regardless of whether you're actually in a hybrid solution, whether you're in a private solution or fully public solution, the idea here is that, and even data center, I missed that one. I know it's full on-premises. You can use the Cisco Cloud Center to help you to manage that idea too, okay? So it's very neat in terms of what it can do. Scope-wise, it also helps you out, especially if you say, hey, look, I'm going to carve out, maybe it's just within my own company, essentially I'm going to run the private cloud by myself or a hybrid cloud solution by myself, but I'm also going to set up multi-tenants. In other words, I might divide up the cloud resources based on departments if I want to, okay? So I might do something like that, or I might even divide it up, based on some other things, or it might be within my building where there are multiple different companies, and that means I can use the Cisco Cloud Center to also help me to administer, okay, as well as govern the idea of multi-tenancy, okay? So that means I can actually go ahead and separate those resources out so that Vaughn is getting her particular aspect of the cloud. It looks like she's got a full cloud deployment solution that she wants, and then other companies can do so as well. And I essentially just act as a vendor, in other words, like AWS or Azure myself, even within my own building if I want to. So all that's actually possible as well, okay? Now, when we start to take a look at something like this too, okay, it actually can be hosted inside of whether we want it inside of our own data center or whether you want to host it in the cloud and the public cloud or whether you want to host it in the private cloud. It can actually be managed from anywhere. So you can essentially launch a virtual machine that helps you to actually make this deployment happen depending on where you want to go, okay? So those are some of the benefits that are actually available to you if you choose to use this. Now, if you go, well, what benefit is that over what AWS is giving me, over what Azure is giving me? None. But it is their particular way, since you're studying for a Cisco exam, to approach it from a Cisco-centric solution, is that they're saying if you want to be able to manage the cloud technology in a hybrid environment, you're going to choose the Cisco Cloud Center to help you to do so, okay? And that's the software that's essentially going to be used. Now, the neat thing is too, right, and the way that they approach it is that it's not as clunky, or at least in theory, it's not as clunky for the beginner. Now, once I say that, okay, Vaughn, it's going to look clunky. And the reason why is that if you're just coming into this and not understanding the idea of certain things that have to belong together. So, Vaughn, you work with web pages a lot, and so you kind of understand at least some of the structure that's there, okay? So, as in the infrastructure components, you know you need a server, okay? Well, if you're also going to be hosting like data, right? Somebody's going to be paying you for stuff. You're going to have to host something, right? Some type of database somewhere. Well, you might also need what? Database as well, okay? You might need the front end side of it, something like a WordPress or something like that to help you out. So you can bring up like multiple different components to do so. So we could actually just go, all right, how are we actually going to do this? Vaughn develops a WordPress page. He actually runs it on what type of server? So now Vaughn I shouldn't say has to, Vaughn can decide on what type of server that she wants it to go on. She could choose something like Windows IIS for a web server. She could choose an Apache web server. She could choose, any of these things that are actually out there and available for her to choose from, okay? So she could choose that as well. Then she has database solutions that she can choose from too. Well, most of the time, if I was actually in the Microsoft realm, right, they're saying select what? All Microsoft stuff, right? You do front page. Oh, I know Vaughn loves front page for that front end solution,
I don't
right?
even think that's around anymore.
No, they call it something else, or they've kind of completely gotten rid of it. But a designer, something like
It went to designer for a little
designer,
bit.
yeah.
I still don't know if even that's around
Yeah, who
anymore.
knows? But
I'll look it up.
but just imagine that, right? So you do something like that, okay, for your front end. Then you'd run IIS essentially for your web server itself. But you might go to a SQL server, okay? So all those components and all those different solutions well, Vaughn, in the Microsoft world, in theory, you'd still have to make sure that they could work together and connect them all together and do everything that you want to. Cisco's saying, look, if they're actually available to the infrastructure that's actually out there, and Cisco CloudCenter can actually run on many and various different clouds that are out there, as well as data center components, you name it, that can actually handle quite a bit. Cisco says you pick and choose which ones you want, but they even have deployment templates for us that can actually go ahead and set all that up so that instead of Vaughn having to launch up each one of these components, the front end side, the web server side, the idea of the database, and then get all those connected, she can actually launch it by simply selecting that template, and it builds all three at one time and begins to give her the process to be able to work through that. So Vaughn, that actually comes from just a push of a button if you choose to. That's why I said that in theory at the beginning for someone that's beginning in this, it seems like a pretty good solution instead of having to search around and figure out a lot of the different things that can happen, okay? Now, so those are kind of some of the major benefits that we can see there. Now, once I say that, though, there's also another benefit that they want you to be able to do. So, Vaughn, instead of you just going to a cloud interface like AWS, and then going, oh, I got to figure this out, I got to do this, I got to do this, it also comes from a standpoint of really the DevOps world once again. So they made this DevOps friendly is what they did. And when they did so, they started approaching it in the same way that people develop software, okay? So there's a life cycle type of approach to the way that the way that the Cloud Center helps you to get ready to deploy everything in the cloud and to make it all work together, okay? In our Cisco CCDA show, where we talked about the Design Associate show, we talked about the idea of simplifying design, right? We went from a 7-step model that we call PIPADO. You don't know what that actually means in terms of the acronym. Go and look that up, and you'll see that. To actually something that we called PDM, if I remember correctly. Let me make sure I'm telling you right. Yep, PDM, okay, which is plan, design, and then build, okay? Or I'm lying to you. Manage, and build. So that was my fault, okay? So plan, design, manage, that's another thing that can actually end up happening here. Now, the reason why that is because it depends on who you're explaining to. Use that 7 kind of step model, Vaughn, if you're talking to the people that actually need to build it. But you use something like the PDM here. I don't know why I'm not being able to say that. PDM, PDB, I don't know why PDB comes into my mind, but PDM, it actually is when you need to explain it to decision makers, okay? Here's what we're planning to do. Here's what we want to actually, be able to deploy, okay? So once we plan it, we deploy it, and then we manage it. We do all that stuff. So in other words, you're talking decision makers. They don't have to know all the details behind everything,
Yes, and back to that ITIL training that I've been doing. That's like you have to do plan, and then you engage, and then you design, and
Yeah.
then you build, and then you deploy.
Yeah.
I did pass my certification yesterday. So.
Nice. Yeah. There you go.
That's pretty
Okay.
exciting.
So what does the Cisco Cloud Center do? Well, they change it around a little bit, and let me show you how they change it. So here I'm going to show you a diagram on screen, or a little display here on screen. And this comes directly from the Cisco documents. And I thought that they did so well. It's like, why am I going to try and recreate this thing if I don't have to? But what we're focused on is right here in the center, and we'll go back to the other things, okay? Notice that for them, though, it starts off with the idea of modeling, okay? They're saying they can actually build out the model first, and then, Vaughn, I can say, do you approve of this, okay? Once Vaughn approves, I don't have to now go and buy it and do all that other stuff. I simply deploy it, okay? Then from that point, it is just turning it over to Vaughn and saying, you manage it, okay? So all that's actually a part of what can be done very quickly by whoever's using Cloud Center. Now, the other aspect of that is what we also talked about with multi-tenancy, which is governing and administration, and that Cloud Center can, oops, I zoomed in badly here, okay, is through the private and public and even on container. Oh, man, when I zoomed out, I have done something completely wrong, so I should not have done that. There we go. Let me get back to normal here. Well, so much for normal, but look at that. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, you're all over the place, Ronnie.
I'm all over the place on this thing. So you can actually see, okay? Now, overall, though, what I've kind of left off here at the top, if I can pull that down, is the way that that's done, which is by creating that application profile, okay? Creating the application profile, in other words, knowing what you want to run as services or virtual machines or whatever else you want to do, that's what helps you to understand where that model is going to be built. And the deployment and essentially all that's going to be handled by the Cloud Center itself, as long as everything's actually in hand here. So modeling helps you to build those types of application profiles. Deployment allows you to actually take that and then deploy the application really wherever it actually needs to go. And then you can start tagging it in different ways so that it can be accounted for in terms of cost and location and whatever else we need. And then, of course, the management side of things gives you the ability to do application tasks, create different workflows if you choose to, access control lists, deployment, and what environment's it's going to run in as well, okay? And that deployment environment is just about you being able to keep track and cost of things that you need to. Now, all this stuff is handled by two different components that we're going to describe in our next episode, and we're going to show you those components, which is called the Cloud Center Management. That's one of the big components that we'll have to take a look at. And the other one that actually works in the background and works together with the Cloud Center itself, which is the Cloud Center Orchestrator. So the Cloud Center Manager helps us to do everything that you're seeing here, okay? And then when we go to deploy it, that is where the orchestrator takes over and says, I can push that out and get that ready to go and do what else we need to, okay? Now, ultimately, though, if you're going to do this for the Cisco side, unlike the public cloud solution, okay, where you just go to AWS's website or to Azure's website and they have it all up and ready for you, you have quite a bit more responsibility on your side to be able to do so. So, in other words, you actually have to configure and set it up yourself. So this is not something that's going to be configured for you right away. You have to take some time to do your own configuration for it. Also, where is it going to be hosted? How are you going to manage the Cloud Center environment too? Are you setting up subscription services? Okay, you got to remember that all that stuff actually has to be set up if you're going to do that as well. Okay. The other limitation that you have is that it's actually going to also require a Cloud Center per deployment environment. So what the heck does that mean? Normally what that ends up meaning, right, is that if you have different centers, okay, different locations, different sites, whatever you want to call it, where you're hosting certain things, especially in the hybrid solution, it's going to require a Cloud Center for each one of those environments too. You can also keep track of all of your images in the Cloud Center. So regardless of whether Vaughn has stuff stored here or in New York, in terms of images that she wants to deploy, it can keep track of that and use that across the Cloud Centers as well. And of course, at that point, you still have to do some other configuration to manage the whole thing, including making users or adding users in, and of course, even creating subtenants. In other words, as more people start to be managed under your cloud, you've got to create those accounts and get them ready to go. We've kind of spoiled by the way that cloud solutions have developed, Vaughn, in the last few years. Okay, The very fact is, even if I was a contractor, I'd simply go, oh, I'm going to open up your account for you. And it doesn't take a lot of time in AWS to open up that account. And I can set it up exactly the way that it needs to by simply following their wizard through. Okay. This one, though, there's a wizard, but it does require a little bit more technically challenging in terms of its requirements and how to do this. All right. Now, it does have all of its competitors, and we've already mentioned the biggest ones that are out there. Excuse me. So when you start looking at it, kind of the managed type of hybrid environment is going to be Rackspace, okay? But other things that actually do the same things, if you've ever heard of Red Hats, they have something that they call Cloud Forms. That's another one. VMware has what they call vRealize, which is another type of solution that helps us to do this. There's also an independent one called RightScale. They love getting into this environment because they believe that they're developing as fast as anybody else. And now another particular utility that has gone to the wayside as well, Dell's multi-cloud manager has now also changed, and either it's been deprecated or will be deprecated soon. I think even this month, if I remember correctly. That all those are actually different types of competitors that you may actually end up hearing about. Now, I'm just giving you those as a point of reference, not so much for the exam notes, but any of those things that you have right there. It gives you, again, just a better feel about what can be done inside the Cisco Cloud Center. So Vaughn adds that as an introduction and helps us to understand some of the benefits of it. Remember, don't compare it to everybody else. Cisco is trying to say, here's the benefits of you trying to use this instead of you not having this type of tool on hand when you are building your own cloud deployment model, whatever you want to call it, to make it actually ready to go or service too. So Vaughn, that should be a good introduction, and that means it looks like we are ready to kind of jump in and take a look at how some of this stuff works, and we've got to go over some terminology again that everybody has to be familiar with when we're getting ready for that exam. But hopefully doing the hands-on solution, at least showing you parts of it, will help you to actually understand all these different components and will give you a chance to see it instead of me just standing here talking like I did this whole episode. So Vaughn, that's a great place for us to end.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. And just as a FYI, Front Page was discontinued in 2006.
Well, 2006?
That's what it says.
That's been a long time since we've talked about it.
After that was Expression Web.
Expression Web. I barely remember that.
But it was part of the Designer Suite, but that's also been discontinued for at least 6 years. And actually, they don't have any kind of standalone website builder software anymore. Oh, darn
Serenity now.
Exactly. All right. So just a little bit of trivia for you there, but we are going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Vaughn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We will see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.